Hello, my friends. It is day 272, and we're reading Nehemiah chapter 11 through Nehemiah chapter 13, and we're also reading Psalm chapter 126. And it is good to be back and reading the Bible. And before we get into our recap, I want to share with you the opportunity you have to join us in this year's reading. If you have not yet accepted the invitation, you can check out the description box below. There you'll find a link that will take you directly to the YouVersion Bible app, where you can join a number of people reading the Bible every single day and leaving feedback on the things they're learning. If you want to get a head start and kind of just get plugged in with the reading community that's going to gather on next year, you can check out www.selflesschurch.org. There you'll find a link that will take you to a sign-up page where you can become aware of all the things we're doing, the different activities we're going to have to celebrate 5 years of reading the Bible together, and how we're going to launch a new process in 2026 to jumpstart, if you will, the second part of this decade of reading. So before you know it, we'll have reached 10 years, and we're going to really celebrate then. All right. So today we're finishing off the book of Nehemiah, and I think it may be helpful for us to start where we finished today in Psalm chapter 126, because here it kind of captures everything we've been reading, particularly in Ezra and Nehemiah. In Psalm 126, verse 1, it says, "When the Lord brought back the exiles to Jerusalem, it was like a dream." That's what it meant for them to get to the point that we're reading about today. It was like a dream come true. You know, we think of these moments in our lives where we wish God would do certain things, or we have been waiting for him to do certain things, and it seemed as if it will never happen. And then finally it happens, and you're like, I can't believe this has actually come true. Well, this is what we're reading in Nehemiah chapter 11, 12, and 13. So chapter 11 and chapter 12 is almost kind of like what we would read in a Chronicles, or even some of the different descendancies, even more so maybe the book of Numbers, where they're occupying land again. It's kind of like another exodus of some sort. At least that's what they would have had in their mind. Of course, we understand that this is not an exodus of any kind, as much as it is a return. But they would have thought in terms of, man, we're able to do what happened whenever our forefathers left Egypt. We're resettling in the land. And so in typical fashion, right, the Israelites have done and do a great job of noting every significant change in their history. And that's what happens here in chapter 11, chapter 12. It tells us who the individuals were who occupied the land. It gives us the numbers. It tells us the role of the priests and the Levites in chapter 12. And then it shows us that the wall was dedicated. And kind of like what we saw in the days of Solomon, there were a number of sacrifices offered, and it became a celebratory event. They were all filled with joy, as we read in chapter 12, verse 43. Now, Nehemiah is still there, and there are some instances here where you see Israel, or at least the Judeans, falling back into some of their previous behaviors, the very things that got them in the position of exile that they were just now escaping. And as he's recounting the things they've done in the past, he's warning them not to do those things again. And so we see in chapter 13, verse 11, that the temple is neglected. And that is a beautiful segue to Malachi 1 and 4. Because what we're going to read tomorrow in our last day of reading in the Old Testament is what happens whenever you neglect the temple. What does it look like? And I have to really take a moment to pause here, because when we think about in terms of what went wrong and what was going wrong at this particular time, and then the prophecy that Malachi gives concerning bringing tithes and bringing offerings and fulfilling the responsibilities of giving, what he's addressing is not simply an attempt to fund a program, but rather it is a spirit of neglect towards the spiritual things of God, right? It is this mindset that, you know what, we've built whatever we need to build, and we're just going to go on with life, and we're going to get on with our lives as if none of these other things really matter. But what he's trying to show them is the most important thing. The essential thing about you being able to settle in this land successfully is not just starting a building project, starting the restoration, but maintaining what you restore. So now that the temple is built, many people would have washed their hands and say, all right, great, we did that, let's move on. But what he's saying is, wait a minute, hold on, guys. You are neglecting the temple and you're risking being placed back into exile, because it is the expressions of worship that separates you from the rest of the world. And it is that very responsibility of separating yourself from the rest of the world that keeps you safe from the possibility of being judged yet again as you were during the days of Babylon in exile. All right, so he is upset. I mean, he's really, really upset. In chapter 13, verse 23 says, about the same time Nehemiah speaking, I realized that some of the men of Judah had married women from Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, which was a direct violation. We see that as they were reading and studying the Bible, they were able to see that those were things that they should not do. It says, so I confronted them and called down curses on them. I beat some of them and pulled out their hair. I made them swear in the name of God that they would not let their children intermarry with the pagan people of the land. So you can see when Jesus goes into the temple and he starts whipping people out of there, what he's doing is he's embodying the behaviors of prophets and those zealous individuals in the Old Testament. It's no coincidence and it's no accident. It's not like Jesus lost his cool and he was like, oh, okay, I just can't stand this. Let me just go in and just start beating everybody out of the temple. No, what he's essentially doing is he's embodying the character and the personality of the prophets of the Old Testament, so that when people see what he's doing, their mind immediately goes back to a moment they heard of in the scriptures that they're most familiar with, and that they can understand that what is being conveyed is not just simply an act of uncontrolled and unbridled passion, but rather it is a distinct message that God's anger is present in this moment with the things that are going on in this very temple, just as he was during the times of Nehemiah or Jeremiah or any of the other prophets who took on similar behaviors and characteristics. Okay. So he says in chapter 13, verse 30, so he purged out everything foreign assigned tasks to the priest and made certain that each one of them knew what their work was. And he ends his book by saying, remember this in my favor, oh my God. You see, he's saying, Lord, I have done everything that I needed to do to purify and keep this nation pure. Now, if they go off and they do their own thing, it will not be because I didn't do anything about it or because I didn't take the appropriate stand. I did everything I could to maintain the sort of worship that you commanded. And Lord, remember me for doing this. That should be our prayer. Every one of us should be in a position where we're saying, Lord, I may not be able to stop some of the things that happen. I may not be able to control some of the things that happen, but I can surely be a voice of conviction and a voice of warning to those who do participate in those things, because I am convicted by the will and the way and the word of God. And so that's sometimes the amount of courage we have to exemplify and the things we have to do in order to protect our own souls. You know, to sit by and let some things roll is not going to cut it as a believer. At some point, we have to take a stand, make the bold proclamations, address the controversy, and in a very loving and godly and considerate way, we must, as it has been said in the past, speak truth to power, right? So, brothers and sisters, I hope you have enjoyed Nehemiah. We're only one day away from the New Testament. Tomorrow we'll finish up what has been 273 days of reading. As we enter into the New Testament, I think tomorrow will be 273 days of reading, and we will have finished the Old Testament. So I'll see you tomorrow, where we can celebrate and we can continue our reading in the Word of God. Until then, take care. God bless. And remember, live by the Word.